Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Chuck DeVore. I'm the Chief National Initiatives Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And my remarks are probably best understood through the lens of being broadly in support of last session's SB 1209 by Mr. Chairman, a bill to consolidate elections in Texas. I have 10 points to make. My understanding is that I have a paper that may have been passed out or is available. These 10 points are the highlights from a recent research paper that I completed at the foundation about a month ago. The first point about uniform election dates or consolidating elections is that they do result in higher voter turnout. There is some savings in election administration costs. There is decreased likelihood of special interests dominating a low turnout election. And there is reduced election worker burnout, which I heard mentioned once or twice previously in the prior panel. To give some historical context, prior to the 1890s, most local elections were held ad hoc. They began to be consolidated in off-year elections because the technology of the day, it was very difficult to deal with long ballots using the basic paper ballots, right? It was physically difficult. So about 110 years ago, you started to see local elections separated from federal and state elections. The other thought was that if you separate them, it would reduce the partisan inclinations at local office, which at the time were thought to be injurious. Today, as many as 60,000 of America's roughly 90,000 school board members are elected in elections with turnout of only 10 to 15%, and that applies to Texas as well. There is an incentive for local governments to essentially choose their voters by having elections at odd times with low turnouts. You end up with people voting in an election that have the greatest stakes in that local political jurisdiction, which kind of warps the preferences of the broader electorate. By consolidating or not consolidating elections, pardon me, studies have shown, these aren't my studies, but other studies that I looked into and thought that they had good methodology. But when you don't consolidate elections, there is a higher chance of passing tax increases. Again, going back to the theory of low turnout elections resulting in essentially choosing your voters. There's a significantly increased chance of candidates endorsed by the teachers' unions winning elections, and there is higher pay and benefits for public employees at the local level. That's what happens when you don't consolidate, and again, that's what the data shows nationally. Here in Texas, a good example of the massive difference in turnout. In the general election in 2024, you had 61.2% turnout. In two recent local election cycles, you had between 4.9% and 17.8% turnout, and that would have been for your local May election. To put that into comparison with the 2024 general election turnout, that's 1/12 to 1/6 of the turnout happening at the local level. Point 7 is the cost. Now, here's where things get a little challenging because there are wide ranges of estimates of what it costs to run an election. There's studies all over the place giving information looking at the hard costs. This would be, of course, for the printing of ballots and related documents, the salary of the poll workers and other temporary staff, the renting of polling places, and postage for informational materials and mail ballots. Of course, we don't do a lot of mail ballots here compared to other states like, let's say, California, where 75 to 85% of the ballots are going to be by mail. Here in Texas, other than the COVID year where it was around 10%, it's usually around 3 to 4%. But those are the main costs, and you note that not part of that list, of course, is election equipment, because election equipment is a capital cost, and it's going to be there no matter how many elections you have. But even so, the rough estimate based on the methodology that I looked at with multiple different studies is that by consolidating Texas elections, let's say just getting rid of the May and Saturday election, we could look at about a $29.5 million to $129 million savings, which would accrue to local government. So it is a wide range. I apologize to the committee that I couldn't find better data that would narrow it down. But of course, there will be some cost savings. We know that for sure. There is, of course, an issue or concern about what's called voter roll-off or drop-off or undervoting. I heard this mentioned in the prior panel. I went ahead and looked at some data from my old home county in California, where I used to live 15 years ago. They have consolidated elections there. There's, I think, 6 states that have required election consolidation. And so what was interesting with that is that in a recent election in Orange County, and again, this is to test the proposition of roll-off, in the city of Santa Ana, which is the biggest city in Orange County, the lowest ballot item was 26 items deep on the ballot. Okay, so you had to wade through 26 choices before you got to Proposition FF in the city of Santa Ana. And the roll-off was only 7%. So if you go back to the top of the ballot and all the way down to the bottom, you only lost 7%. Now, again, variable depending on the position you were looking at. The greatest roll-off was in my old area of Irvine. It was for the Irvine Ranch Water District, District 4. It was 8 positions down, and it had a roll-off of 13.4%. So to give you an example, though, to go back and then to compare it to Texas's recent Saturday and May turnout, right? Those 2 positions, the one that was 26 items deep, the overall turnout was 54.5% for that Proposition FF, even though it was 26 positions deep. That would be roughly like 10 times greater than some of the typically low turnout elections that you see in Texas for these Saturday and May elections, where you have 5% of the people turning out. So 54.5%. For that Irvine Ranch Water District, where you had the biggest roll-off from the top, that was 8 positions down, they still had a turnout of 63.7%. Again, higher than Santa Ana, because generally in Irvine, people were more likely to vote than in Santa Ana. It's an area where you have a higher turnout typically. So then the last issue, many of you know Derek Ryan. He's a data analyst for elections. I've worked with him over the years, and I asked him a lot of questions about this issue. And there was a portion of our conversation that I recorded that I used with his permission in my report. Because I've heard concerns from members of the Texas legislature about, well, gee, if we consolidate elections, won't it potentially cause some sort of a partisan advantage for one party or the other in the general election? And this was the question I asked Derek Ryan. And I'm going to quote now, this is in my report, from Derek Ryan. This is a conversation that occurred on December 11th of last year. He said, quote, "I am all for moving May elections to November, not for any partisan gain, but because I think it's easier for voters, it's cheaper for taxpayers, and lastly, from a data collection standpoint, it would make my life easier professionally. I think, if anything, some of the data refutes the argument that conservatives want to move the election to get better results." Now, what he's referring to there is I specifically asked him, in certain jurisdictions in Texas where local elections were in fact consolidated, because we leave it up to localities in Texas so far to determine when they're going to have their elections. And I asked him, test for me the proposition, looking at the voter turnout from a partisan standpoint, do you see any particular partisan advantage with elections in November in those jurisdictions that have consolidated? And he looked at the data in Texas's largest counties. And his answer was no, it's a wash. You'll see that in some jurisdictions it seems like there's just a little bit of a boost for Democrat voters, and in other jurisdictions it seems like just a little bit of a boost for Republican. So overall, he thought it was a wash professionally. And so with that, members, that is a summary of the highlights of this 10-page report that I developed a few months ago.